First motorcycle job was at the BMW wheel shop in Thetford, Vermont. Spring of 1972 is when Peter Pickett hired me the first time. And he fired me 3 weeks later because I made a really smart-ass remark, and he just said, you can't stay here, you gotta go. And a few weeks later, he called me up. He said, I really, really need a mechanic. Do you want to come back?
What would it be this time around?
I said, well, I can tell you two things. I said, number one, I'm not going to cut my hair. My hair was to my ass then, and which he wanted. I was like, you can't tell people to cut their hair. Even in 1972, you couldn't do that. And especially in a very liberal area, I mean, right outside of college, you know. And I said to him, I'm going to dress the way I want, and you're going to pay me a better salary. So by God, he paid me a better salary, $150 a week, 6-day weeks. We've got a lot of guys that come up in like December and start planning for post-graduation European vacation, and they would take a European delivery plan. Because in those days, European delivery, you fly into Munich, they pick you up at the airport. BMW has a limousine that picks you up and brings you to the factory reception area. They give you your motorcycle, give you a whole walk around of it and everything, and send you on your way to the hotel room that they've paid for. And you get like 2 or 3 days in Munich, and then you go off and tour around. When you get done, you bring your bike back to the factory. They wash it up, take the stuff off it that need to recrate it, and ship it to the U.S. And you're importing a used bike then. So all of the tariffs just vanish. Okay, no, I had a Bridgestone DT 175 Hurricane Scrambler that I had bought when I was in college at a party. I bought it from somebody, and apparently I traded a .22 rifle for it. Because like 4 days later, I kept walking out of my apartment in Burlington, Vermont, past this bike that had snow all over it. And I thought, God, what kind of an asshole leaves his bike in the snow? After like 3 days, I dusted the snow off the gas tank and the seat for the guy. And it was a good thing, it's my bike. I'm cleaning my apartment. It's actually cleaning up after my roommate, who was like an animal. And I find the bill of sale to the bike. And the key. I was like, fuck, that's my bike. In a heartbeat. I got my old pudding pot ski helmet in my hand, got my parka on him, out the door. I'm kicking, get that thing. It was 2-stroke. And I take off, and it's like late November. I go out on like a 20-mile loop around Burlington, Vermont. I go east and then south. And I come around and I get on a little highway bypass, and I get the thing up to speed, and it goes into a speed wobble, and I go off the road and down into a ditch, down a deep, steep embankment, through a mushy, swampy area. And the beauty of it was that it slowed the bike down, so it just toppled over, and I fell off. But when I fell off, I was in a tree. And I was like 5 feet off the ground, and something on the back of me was hooked on the tree, and I couldn't move. And I'm hanging like sideways. And somebody came by, and I'm like waving. The cars came by, were coming by. Somebody finally saw me. And he came down, and he looked, and he's like, I don't know that I can help you. He said, I don't have a ladder or anything. I don't know what to do. I said, well, if you could find a stick or something, just lean it against the tree. I could probably put my foot on it and get down, but he didn't want to do that. So he went, because nobody had cell phones, I'm talking about in the 70s. He went and got the police, and they came back with the fire engine and everything, and they rescued me. And they even brought my bike up to the side of the road, and nobody said a word about the fact there was no license plate on the bike, and I didn't have a motorcycle. They never asked for my license. They were more concerned, am I all right?
They were probably having too much fun because they just found a teenager.
Yeah. It was like, we got something to talk about this at the bar tonight kind of thing, yeah. Was a 74 R90/6. I bought the R90/6. I really wanted an R90S. They had a customer who wrecked an R90S, and they ordered all the new body work for it, and the guy said, I don't want the bike. And they had all the brand new body work sitting there. So and it's owner of the shop that I worked at But he fired me before I wrecked it. I wrecked it on the way home from being fired. I just was,
Back to the /6 or the
yeah, the /6.
Ah.
Yeah, I was just like pissed. I just like wound it up and just went and went and went. And I came to a long sweeping curve, and there was a driveway coming down off a hill with dirt, and the dust was out in the road. When the first drops of rain hit it, and it became like grease. And I'm not lean, I'm a little bit, but I didn't really know how to ride then. And the bike had a rib tire in the front and a knobby on the rear. Excellent traction combination. Particularly worked well when I went off the road down into the swamp. I have a thing for swamps, apparently. And ended up the bike in the swamp, completely under the water, except for the exhaust pipes, and the throttle is just whacked to the stop. It just, so I'm wading down there, and I'm trying to get to the key, which is on the side of the frame down by the tank, on the side away from me, and I couldn't reach it without putting my head under the water, and I wasn't going to do that. I mean, this swamp, it was just like mud and algae and shit on there. God only knows what was in there. And so I said, well, I'll just yank a spark plug wire off. That'll shut down. Well, I can tell you, if you're standing in water, don't pull a spark plug wire.
That seems prudent, yeah.
The next 5 minutes, I don't remember real clearly. But I didn't die. Well, I went to work. I worked for Peter Pickett at the wheel shop for 4 years, 4.5 years. I went to service school at Butler and Smith. And Udo Giedel was the teacher because they had just ended the training program in '76, and so they made him teach service school. He wasn't feeling that at all, not at all. But he went into Peter Adams, who owned, Peter was the vice president of Butler and Smith. His father actually was the owner in absence. And they told Udo, okay, you can run service school. And he said, well, I need to hire somebody to help me. And they said, okay. I guess they kind of thought that the service school was always 2 instructors, usually other guys in the service department. So they said, okay. So he mentions this we're having lunch at the end of service school before I started teaching. And he says to me, he said that we're talking about the standard of living in Germany. It was so high and so good that they offered a guy $25,000 a year to relocate to the States, and the guy laughed at them. He said you'd have to triple that to equal the standard of living here in Germany, and I have to go someplace where I don't know the language. Or I mean, all Europeans speak English, but he wasn't really comfortable in it. So Udo mentions this to me in the lunch at service school. And I said, I'd crawl over broken glass to make $25,000 a year. That time I was making like $6,500 a year. $102.65 a week was my take-home pay. I'll never forget. Because my cable bill 1 month was identical. So Peter hired me. I worked for Peter. I went to work at Butler and Smith in 1976, right after the AMA Superbikes at Daytona. All of a sudden, Udo was the hero. You know, and they pretty much let him do whatever he wanted, including hiring me and doing a whole new service school program with, 2 different rooms and everything. He spent money like water, and it's just everything. He ordered 5 new toolboxes for the service department from Snap-on, all filled up with stuff. After 6 months, 90% of the shit was gone. Because all the guys in the parts department would come in during lunch break, and the service classroom was right next to it. They'd go in, grab a couple items. Hey, they were nice tools. Anyways, so we taught, Udo and I taught school, and we alternated all week. And then in 1980, beginning of 1980, Udo gets a call from Honda. They want to take him. They want him to come to Japan and talk about doing a racing team in the U.S. So he goes over there. I don't know. He comes by my house at 11 o'clock at night. He said, "I'm going to Japan. You got to handle the school for the rest of the week." I'm like, "What do you mean going to Japan?" He said, "Honda wants to hire me." I said, "Are you going to take it?" He said, "I already took it." He said, "It's a great opportunity," and I mean, they let him build his own building. He went out in the parking lot, he marked off with chalk. He says, "We want the building." And they were like, okay. He spent $6 million. Didn't bring them any titles that year. They had Bubba Schobert and Freddie Spencer riding for him. You'd think they could have, put some tin up on the shelves. You know? But the following year, they did very well. They started winning a lot of stuff. And
What year was this?
that was 1980.
Okay.
That was spring of 1980 because he left to go to Honda. 2 weeks later, Oak Oaklishan, you know who that is?
Yeah.
Oak is a dear friend of mine. For years we had been corresponding. He would send letters to Butler and Smith to Gene Shirley. Gene would give me all the letters, say write an answer. I would write an answer. Gene would sign it and send it back. And so then I would talk on the phone with Oak and stuff and back and forth, and we developed a very good relationship and friendship. And so he was invited to come to service school and he wrote a really nice article that was in the BMW News called "Your Tech Editor Goes to School." And had my picture in there and all the thing. In one picture, it showed me working on something and sitting in front of a frame up in an engine stand. And he said, I was a walking shop manual. That line, that caption, locked in the rest of my career. Any place I went, they heard my name, they're like, "You're hired. You're hired right away. No question, you're hired." No, you got to prove anything to anybody. We already know who you are. Come on in. And it was great. Well, I worked at the wheel shop in Vermont, and I worked at Butler and Smith for 5 years. And when they closed, I was the only one that BMW didn't hire of anybody other than secretarial staff. So I was like dumped out on the street. We had a 7-month-old baby. That was my first wife. And I was like, Peter Adams called me in his office and said to me, on the last day, he said, "I would like for you to bring the company car up to my house, lock the whole building." He said, "Go around and make sure." He said, "I think you're the only one that knows how every lock works in here." He said, because I worked a lot of late nights there and, plundered the parts department on a very regular basis, We were probably the only race team that had 100 head gaskets with us when we went to the race, I couldn't, the parts weren't taking the entire case of the head gaskets. But those were the days. And I got away with that shit. But he said, when you come back, you can't park it in front of the building. So that was cool. So I stayed at Butler and Smith until 1980. August 30th or 31st, 1980. Because if I'd been there one more day, I would have invested in my pension. So Peter Adams has me bring the company car up to his house and bring the keys, lock up the building, and bring them up. Invites me in for his wife made coffee and pastry. His wife was a very, very classy lady, just really good, obviously upper class, but very elegant, very well spoken, just did all the hospitality stuff just right. So, and he gave me a card that said, "Thank you for your service." And I said, "Oh, I really appreciate that." He said, "You should open it." And I opened it up. It was a check for every penny that I would have gotten from my pension, plus $500. And I looked at it, he said, yes. He said, "Mr. Dolber, who was the comptroller, told me that you weren't vested in the pension because of the date that we closed." He said, "If we closed at 9 o'clock the next morning, your pension would have paid off." He said, "So I discussed it with my father." He said, "We just decided that we would just pay off your pension." I had a shop in Brooklyn. I called it the Excuse Me Garage. Franco Guercio, who was the in-house mechanic at Butler and Smith, he lived in Brooklyn. I lived in Brooklyn. He calls me up. He says, "You got to give me a job." I said, "Frank, I would love to, except that I don't have a business. Where am I going to give you a job in?" He says, "Let's make one. We make a store." He said, "I have a good place, a nice garage right on the corner from my house." He said, "I can walk around the corner there." He said, "I can see the back door of the business from my window." He said, "So we have security." I figured it's also backed up to the police precinct, which helps. So we got set up. We rented this space from It turned out Frank Barranca is a Genovese captain, a mobster. I went to him one day at the gas company, said I needed to show him my lease before they'd turn on the gas. So I go to him and I said, I need a copy of a lease. And so he writes on a piece of paper, Tommy Cutter, have a lease with me. Signs his name. I take it to the gas company. I give it to the lady. I said, my landlord barely speaks English. And he wrote this. She said, that's fine. She said, I just have to check off that I saw the paper. She said, that's your lease as far as I'm concerned. It's like, cool. And that place, never forget, we were supposed to open. I made little flyers. I had address list of 200 names or something. I had a little, it wasn't even a photo, it was a copier of some sort that I had. I would have cranked it with a handle. And, it was smelly and everything. I had it in my basement. I made these little flyers. And I had a friend of mine who was a draftsman. He drew up a little logo and stuff. And we sent them out. And unfortunately, I never saved a copy of that flyer. I do have one out in the shop. I have one of the announcements of things I had on the wall, which was like our hours and labor rate and all that stuff. That's all they got left of that place. I didn't save anything else. But 5 years we were there, and from the first day, Franco called me up, supposed to open at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. He calls me like 7:30, Tommy, you better come down here. The people start a fight. I said, what do you mean they started? He says, they're starting to fight about who will come first, who come after. I said, what do you mean? He said, all at Sackett Street, 1 block full of motorcycles. I said, how is that even possible? I said, you got to be full of shit. They parked so much the cars couldn't go up and down that street. They had to go another block and go around. I said, what is wrong with you people? You got your bike parked in the middle of the block, and the police station's right on the other side of it. I said, you can't do this. So the cop came over, comes down and says, what's going on? I said, well, we just opened up. I said, we sent out flyers. I said, I didn't expect this response. He said, well, we'll give you an hour to get it cleared out. Get everybody to get their bikes parked. He said, if they park on the sidewalk, we're going to look away for a little while, but get them off the street so people can drive up and down the street, because that's the route to the ramp to get on the highway. And but I tell you, that place, that was a gold mine from day one. By the end of the first day, there was a long straight, and the work area was in the back, and the front was like a bathroom and a parts area and an office, and the other side we parked bikes all along. And we filled that space by the end of that Saturday. I still had the shop in Brooklyn when we bought this house. I was commuting a little bit. I was staying in the apartment that the kid that I hired, I rented an apartment for him. And then his parents came and took him home. So I got this apartment that I've rented and I've signed a lease on it, and it's 2 blocks from my shop. I was like, okay. We sold our house in Brooklyn. It's like, okay, I'll sleep there. I would come home like once a week. Then it was like once every 2 weeks. I would come home late at night, first thing in the morning, get up and drive back to Brooklyn and work. And just work. Work and do coke. Work and do that. It was like crazy. It's fucking insane. You work to buy more coke, to work to buy more coke. It was just out of sight. A guy that lived up the street came down one day, and he's like a customer, but he came in like 3 or 4 days in a row, had his head shaved and stuff, kind of a wacky guy. Says to me one day, he says, are you tired of it yet? I said, what? He said, the drugs. Are you tired of it yet? He said, I watch you. He said, I come down here and hang around for hours, I watch you. He said, you're in the grip, aren't you? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I have denial. He said, you let me know when you're ready to stop. So about like a month later, I came home and Paula told me she'd had enough and that she just wanted out. And I was like, let me make a call. And I called this guy, got his girlfriend who was in his apartment. She said, well, he's not home, but I'll have him call you in a few minutes. I know where he is. Called him, and she talked to him, and he called me, talked to me for a while, and he said, meet me at your shop tomorrow morning. So I said, okay. I didn't find this out for like 6 months. He was in North Carolina at his brother's bedside. His brother died that night. And so he flew back to look after me. And I said to him 8 months later, I said, why did you do that? He said, and I get choked up when I think about this, he said, God had him. God put you in my hands. He said, that phone rang. He said, and that told me that's something I could do. He said, I couldn't do anything in the hospital but stand there and wish that my brother would get better, which he didn't. So he came and he sponsored me, and I got clean. I've been clean for 32 years, and never looked back. I was like, getting that monkey off my back was nice. Several real high-dollar restorations, 100-point restorations. I did like 6 or 7 of them. I got tired of it after a while. The first one was an R80/7, belonged to a guy in Southern California. He trucked it all the way out here in his van, dropped it off. I had it about 8 months, full resto. Made it like a brand new R80, like it rolled right out of the box. But it cost him 20 grand. And I thought to myself, you could have bought 3 R80s for that brand new ones. You could have had all the colors that were available. But, that's not what he wanted. Then he went to some rallies on the West Coast and started talking it up. And the people were like, they were looking at his bike, and they said, this looks like a brand new bike. He said, no. He had ridden the bike all over Europe and stuff, and all over the Southwest. And it wasn't bashed up. None of the bodywork was damaged, but it was high mileage and worn. And we 0 miled the whole bike. Literally every single piece of that motorcycle got touched, from the crankshaft to the inside of the instrument cluster to the taillight. Every single piece got attention, got freshened up, renewed, whatever, put a new wiring harness on the bike and shit. And we went out, gained attention. People looked at it and said, it's a really nice restoration. Did that bike. I did a R90S for a guy that bike was at the R90S anniversary. He walked away with several of the trophies and stuff because I 0 miled the bike. I tell him, I'm going to make this like a brand new motorcycle. It's going to be different. It's not going to be like a new bike. It's going to be a new bike. It's going to have exactly the same paint on the frame. It's going to have exactly. I didn't like powder coat the frame. I learned not to do that. I learned a lot of stuff. It's like when you change something, it changes. It's no longer original. Restoration means you restore it to what it was, not a renovation. A renovation makes you make it renewed. You make it new. You update it. You put more modern stuff in it. But my restorations were, and the thing about them is they were so simple to me because I had an eidetic memory. So I didn't need to look up in books and shit. I had plenty of these bikes apart. I could just pile all those, literally dump a whole bunch of parts out in a pile and just put a bike together. And when I had guys working for me, they were like, how the hell do you do that? I was with Chris Sutton one day, and he was working for me. Washed all these transmission parts for me. And he said to me, how do you want me to lay them? And I said, just dump it on the table. Put a towel on the table, dump them on there. He looks at his pile of parts. He said, how the fuck are you going to know it? I said, 20 minutes, I'm going to have that transmission back together, ready for the shimming. He said, that's not possible. I said, you want to do it? I said, 30 minutes blindfolded. He never called me. And I did that at service school one time with Bud Proven, actually. You ever read Bud's posts on the air list or anything?
No.
Bud posts very frequently on the air list. He was a student in service school. And I said, oh, we're doing an engine and transmission thing and in the class. And I said, I could probably build one of these things with my eyes closed. He said, I don't think so. It's worth to you. What's it worth to you?